The green bean casserole I made sat at the end of the table, untouched, like it had done something wrong. My mom had already moved past it twice to get to the store-bought rolls my sister-in-law brought. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. That was the moment I realized nothing had changed. My brother's birthday dinner. I drove 40 minutes to get there. I'd been up since 6 that morning prepping that casserole. The one my grandmother used to make, with the crispy onions on top the way my brother always said he loved. I brought a bottle of wine, too. A good one, not the kind you grab at the checkout line. I sat down at the table, and my dad looked across at me and said, "Still crashing on your friend's couch?" I was not crashing on anyone's couch. I owned a home. I had owned it for 2 years. My sister-in-law laughed first. Then my mom smiled into her plate. My brother didn't say anything, just kept cutting his chicken. I said, "No, Dad, I own a house." My voice came out steady, which surprised me. He waved his hand. "You know what I mean." I didn't say anything else. I ate my food. I drove home. And I thought about the fact that my brother and his wife lived in that house, the one I owned. The one I'd bought at 29 with my own savings while working full-time and finishing my MBA at night. Let me back up. I'm the youngest of 3. My sister Audrey moved to Portland years ago, got out early, smart woman. My brother Scott stayed close to home, married his college girlfriend Teresa, had 2 kids. My parents treated that like the correct answer to a question nobody asked me. I was the one who went to school on loans, worked through college, took a corporate job in Charlotte that paid well, but meant I wasn't home for Sunday dinners. I was the one who didn't get married at 26. I was the one my dad introduced at family gatherings with, and this is our youngest, still figuring things out. I was 31. I had a 401k and a health savings account and a home I purchased with a 15% down payment. I was not figuring things out. The house was in Concord, about 25 minutes outside the city. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard with a deck I'd stained myself. I loved that house. I'd picked out every piece of furniture, every light fixture. The kitchen had white subway tile and open shelving, and I was genuinely, embarrassingly proud of it. About 8 months after I closed on it, Scott called me. He and Teresa had been renting a place in Kannapolis that had mold issues. The landlord wouldn't fix them, they had a toddler and another baby on the way. They needed to move fast. He asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they figured out their next steps. I said yes. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't purely selfless. Part of me thought this was the thing that would finally make my family see me as a real adult. Like if I opened my home to them, my parents would stop looking through me at the dinner table. Stupid, I know. But that was part of it. The few months turned into 14. I want to be clear about the arrangement, because this is where the story gets confusing if I'm not specific. I didn't move out of my house. I was there the whole time. I work from home, so I was there every day in my office on the 2nd floor, while Scott and Teresa and eventually their 2 kids occupied the master bedroom, the guest room, and most of the living space. I slept in the daybed I shoved into my office. I gave up my bedroom because Teresa said the master was better for the kids' routine, and I, again, stupidly agreed. They paid me $600 a month. The mortgage was $2,200. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, I was covering all of it. Scott knew this. We talked about it when they moved in. He said they'd contribute more once they got stable. That was in February. By the following April, they were stable. Scott had gotten a raise. Teresa had gone back to work part-time. The $600 never changed, and I never brought it up, because every time I even approached the subject, my mom would call me later and say, "He's doing his best. You know how hard it is with 2 little ones," and I'd feel like the bad guy for wanting to be paid what we'd agreed on. So I kept quiet. I kept cooking dinner most nights because Teresa said the kitchen layout confused her. I don't know what that means. I've thought about it many times. The kitchen is not confusing. And I kept doing the laundry schedule, and I kept smiling at my dad's jokes about how I was the one in the family who needed help getting on her feet. The birthday dinner was in October. The green bean casserole incident. After I got home that night, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. The light was on in the living room. I could see the back of Scott's head through the window. He was watching something on my TV with the volume up. I called my friend, Gemma. She's the kind of person who tells you the truth even when it stings. I've known her since college. She listened to the whole thing. The casserole. My dad. The hand wave. All of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You own that house and you're sleeping in a daybed in your own office. Do you hear yourself?" I told her it was temporary. She said, "It's been over a year." I told her they were family. She said, "And they know that. That's the whole problem." We stayed on the phone for almost 2 hours. By the end of it, something had shifted. Not anger exactly. I'd been angry plenty of times. This is more like clarity. The kind that feels cold and certain. I started paying attention differently after that. I noticed that Teresa had rearranged my kitchen shelving without asking me. Not reorganized. Physically moved the shelves. She'd also replaced the pendant light above the island with something she bought from Home Goods. The original fixture was in the garage in a box. She hadn't asked. She'd just done it. I noticed that my dad called Scott every Sunday, but called me maybe once a month. And when he did, the first question was always some variation of, "So are you seeing anyone?" Never, "How's work?" Never, "How's the house?" Nothing that acknowledged that I had built an actual life. I noticed that at Thanksgiving, when my mom was telling everyone about Scott's promotion, she mentioned the house. She said, "They've been so lucky to have that place in Concord. It's really given them stability." She said it to my aunt like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. Like the house had appeared out of thin air. Like I wasn't the one paying for the stability. I didn't say anything at Thanksgiving either. What I did instead was make an appointment with a property attorney the following week. Not because I decided anything yet, just because I wanted to know my options. I wanted to understand what I was actually dealing with. The attorney, a woman named Ms. Garland, who had this very calm, matter-of-fact way of explaining things that I found deeply comforting, told me that because Scott and Teresa had been living there for over a year with a verbal rental agreement, they had established tenancy. That meant I couldn't just ask them to leave. I had to give proper written notice. In North Carolina, that's 30 days for month-to-month tenants. But given the length of time in the informal arrangement, she recommended 60 days to avoid any potential disputes. She also asked me if I had documentation of the $600 a month they were paying me. I had Venmo records going back 14 months. She said that was good. She also told me that any damage to the property that I could document would be relevant if it came to that. I went home and I walked through every room with my phone and took photos. This was not something I'd planned to do. I just started doing it. The pendant light was gone. The Home Goods replacement was there. My original light was still in the garage, but the box had been opened and shoved sideways, and there was a crack in one of the glass panels. The guest bathroom had a towel bar that had been pulled off the wall. The drywall was gouged. The deck had a rust stain where Scott had left a steel fire pit sitting directly on the wood for months. I had asked him twice to put something under it. I took photos of all of it. I also checked the fence along the back of the property. One of the panels had been knocked out and just leaned back against the post, not repaired. The neighbors had a dog. This had been like this for at least 2 months based on when I first noticed it and mentioned it to Scott. None of these were catastrophic. The house wasn't destroyed. But it was my house, and I had taken care of it, and these were things that had happened because someone was living in it without any real sense of ownership or accountability. I put the photos in a folder on my phone labeled Dentist, so no one would accidentally see it and ask me about it. I did not tell Gemma what I was doing yet. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept being normal. I kept making dinner. I kept smiling at my dad's voicemails. In December, my company had its end-of-year review process. I got a good performance rating and a bonus that was larger than I expected. I remember sitting at my desk upstairs reading the email and feeling this strange combination of relief and something sadder. Like, I'd been working so hard for so long and no one in my family even knew what I did. Not really. My dad thought I worked in computers. My mom thought I worked for a bank. I've explained my actual job to both of them several times. I used part of the bonus to quietly consult a second time with Ms. Garland. This time, I came in knowing what I wanted. I told her I wanted to issue a formal notice to vacate, 60 days. I wanted it done legally, calmly, with no room for dispute. She drafted it. I reviewed it. It was 4 paragraphs, very plain. It referenced the start date of their tenancy, the monthly rental amount of $600, and specified the move-out date as February 28th. It said I appreciated that they had taken care of the property during their stay, which I felt a small pang about writing, but Ms. Garland said it was standard language and it didn't hurt to keep the tone neutral. I did not hand it to them myself. I mailed it, certified mail, to my own house. Scott called me on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, making pasta. He said he'd gotten the letter. I said I knew. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What is this?" I said, "It's a notice to vacate. You and Teresa have until the end of February." He said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes." He said, "We have kids." I said, "We have kids." I said, "I know. That's why I gave you 60 days instead of 30. He was quiet again. Then his voice changed, got lower, harder. He said, "Mom and Dad are going to hear about this." I said, "That's fine." He hung up. My mom called me that night. She'd already heard from Scott. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's upset, but trying to sound calm. A little higher, a little faster. She said, "I don't understand what's happening. What did Scott do?" I said, "He didn't do anything specific, Mom. I need my house back." She said, "They have 2 children." I said, "I know." She said, "You have plenty of room." I said, "It's my home." She said, "Well, I don't think you've really thought about how this affects the family." I said, "I've been thinking about it for about 14 months. She went quiet. I said, "I bought that house on my own. I've been paying the mortgage on my own. I gave Scott and Teresa a place to stay when they needed it, and I'm glad I could do that. But I need my house back. I'm not asking for permission." She said she'd talk to my dad. Like somehow his input was the next required step. My dad called 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was about 4 minutes long. The first 3.5 minutes were about how family takes care of each other. How he'd always tried to set an example of that. How his parents had helped him and his brothers when times were hard. The last 30 seconds were him saying, "I just think you should really consider what you're doing here." I listened to it twice, and then I made a note in my phone of the date and time in case I ever needed to document the pressure campaign. That sounds paranoid. I don't regret doing it. Teresa texted me separately. Her text was long, 3 paragraphs, and the main points were that she'd put a lot of work into the house, that the kids were settled in their routines, and that moving in winter was hard on children. There was a sentence near the end that said, "I feel like you're punishing us for something, and I don't even know what we did." I read that sentence several times. What she had done, and what Scott had done, was live in my house for over a year, without adequate compensation, without maintaining the property, without acknowledging in any real way that I was the reason they had a stable place to live. What my family had done was look right through that and tell the story that I was the one who needed looking after. I didn't respond to her text. There was nothing I could say that would land correctly. She believed her version of events completely. My parents came over for dinner in January. I had told Scott and Teresa I was having family over, and they needed to plan to be out of the house for the evening. They took the kids to Scott's friend's place. My parents sat at the kitchen table. My mom looked at the home goods light and said she liked it. I did not explain. We had dinner. It was fine. My dad made a few comments about how I needed to reconsider, how Scott was working on finding a place, but it was hard in this market. I listened. I said I understood it was hard. I said the notice stood. Near the end of the night, my dad said, "And I want to get this right, because I've replayed it." He said, "I just worry about you, living alone out here, you're not getting any younger." My mom said, "She knows what she wants, Richard." That surprised me. I looked at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her coffee cup. But she'd said it. I said, "Thank you, Mom." She nodded once. Scott and Teresa were out by February 24th, 4 days early. They left a few things behind, a broken step stool, some canned goods in the pantry, a toy car under the couch. I boxed everything up and texted Scott that it was on the porch. He picked it up 2 days later. We didn't see each other. The first night I slept in my own bedroom again. My actual bedroom was my own furniture. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about calling Gemma. I thought about the casserole still in my car the night of the birthday dinner, how I'd driven home with it and put it in the fridge and eaten it for lunch the next 3 days, because it actually was really good. I thought about that attorney's office, how calm I'd felt in there once I decided what I wanted. I thought about my mom saying she knows what she wants. I hung the original pendant light back up the following weekend. I had to watch a YouTube video to figure out the wiring. It took about 40 minutes. When I turned it on, the kitchen looked exactly the way I'd wanted it to look when I first moved in. I also got a quote to repair the fence, the towel bar, and the deck. The total came out to about $1,400. I sent Scott a breakdown and a Venmo request. He left it pending for 3 weeks. Then he paid it. He didn't say anything. No message, no note. Just the payment. I got the notification on my phone while I was at the grocery store, and I stood there in the cereal aisle for a moment reading it. Then I put my phone back in my pocket and got what I came for. My dad called me on a Sunday in March. He asked how the house was. I said it was good. He asked if I'd met anyone lately. I said not recently. He asked how work was going. Actually asked, for the first time in a long time. I told him a little bit about a project I'd been leading. He listened. It wasn't a transformation. He didn't apologize for the still figuring things out comments, or the birthday dinner hand wave, or the 4-minute voicemail. That's not how my dad operates. But he asked about my work, and he listened, and that was something. I don't know what Scott told my parents about why they left. I never asked. There's a version of the story he tells where I'm the difficult one, the one who kicked his family out, the one who chose a house over her own brother. Maybe that's what gets told at dinners I'm not at. I can't control that. What I know is that I'm sleeping in my bedroom. My kitchen has the right light in it. The fence is fixed. When people treat your generosity like a given, they stop seeing it as generosity at all. They just see it as the way things are, as if you're a feature of their life rather than a person with a life of your own. I spent a long time trying to be useful enough to be seen. That's not how it works. It was never going to work that way. I still go to family dinners. I brought a pie last Thanksgiving. Nobody made a comment about where I was living or how I was managing. We watched the game, and my mom told a long story about her neighbor's dog, and my dad fell asleep in the armchair before dessert. It was fine. It was actually fine. I drove home to my house. Mine. All of it, every room. And I turned on the kitchen light, and I made myself a cup of tea. And I sat at the island, and I thought, this is exactly what I built this for. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way. Not like I'm sitting here writing it out in a journal with candles lit. Just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when the dust finally settles and you can see the full shape of what occurred. The truth is, nothing that happened was sudden. It just looked sudden from the outside. My dad didn't say something cruel at a birthday dinner, and then lose access to a house the next morning. That's not how it worked. What actually happened was years of small choices, mine and theirs, that accumulated into something neither side fully acknowledged until it became impossible to ignore. They chose over and over to look past what I was contributing. I chose over and over to let them. That's the part I had to sit with. Not just their behavior, but mine. The way I kept hoping that doing more would eventually make me visible. That if I just kept the casserole warm and paid the mortgage and stayed quiet, something would shift. It didn't shift because quiet doesn't shift things. Quiet just gets mistaken for agreement. What changed me wasn't anger. Anger had been there for a long time and it hadn't moved anything. What changed me was Gemma asking a very simple question. Do you hear yourself? And me actually stopping to listen to the answer. That's the thing about having one person in your life who tells you the truth. You can ignore it for a while, but eventually it lands. And when it lands, it's clarifying in a way that nothing else is. I think about Scott and Teresa sometimes, and I don't feel bitter about them. I feel something more like tired. They weren't malicious people. They were people who had been given something for so long that they stopped registering it as a gift. That happens. It's human. The problem wasn't that they were bad. The problem was that I kept waiting for them to notice something they had every incentive not to notice. You can't outsource your own self-respect to someone else's awareness. That's what I learned. You can't wait for the person benefiting from your silence to decide on their own to stop benefiting. It doesn't work that way. At some point, you have to be the one who draws the line, clearly, legally, without apology, and then you have to hold it. The courage part wasn't sending the notice. The courage part was accepting that doing the right thing for myself was going to make me the difficult one in someone else's story. That's a real cost. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't uncomfortable. My dad's voicemail, my mom's phone call, Teresa's long text. None of that felt good. I didn't enjoy any of it. But discomfort and wrongness aren't the same thing. I had to learn to tell the difference. The pendant light is back up. The fence is fixed. Scott paid the $1,400 without a single word, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he understood what he owed. My mom said, she knows what she wants. I think about that more than anything else from that night. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a full acknowledgement. But it was something. A small, quiet recognition that maybe the story they'd been telling about me wasn't entirely accurate. I sit at my kitchen island now, and it looks exactly the way I always meant for it to look. That's not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing.